She whispered in his ear, "I send to you death in the form of a woman. You will lose everything, and your saints will not protect you from the spirit that will drain you." Welcome to The Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. The following is a true story with names and identifying details changed to protect the privacy of those involved. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I had a spiritual mentor named Lorimar, who was a woman in her 50s, originally from Barrio Obrero in San Juan, Puerto Rico. When I knew her, she was living in Massachusetts, but prior to moving to Mass, she had lived in the New York area for 30 years, where she was a renowned espiritista and santera and operated a botanica, performing readings and services for clients, as well as selling supplies needed for the practice of several Afro-Caribbean spiritual traditions. She had been raised as a practitioner of Espiritismo, or the Mesa Blanca as she called it. But by the time I knew her, she was in semi-retirement and only mentored very few people. I had the privilege of being part of that select group. One day I was at her apartment and we were flipping through the TV channels and came across Dark Shadows, the hit 1960s vampire-themed gothic soap opera with which I was obsessed at the time. I told Lorimar that I was a fan of the show and loved anything related to vampires, and she enthusiastically replied, "I used to be crazy about that show. You know, vampires can be summoned and put to work on your behalf. I know a story that happened back in the 70s in New York, and people still talk about it today." I knew the guy it happened to. His name was Joaquin. He was a major tool and had it coming. He screwed over somebody that mistakenly thought he was a friend, and she had to put him in his place. I worked with him at a restaurant in the Bronx selling frituras before I opened my botanica. For those not familiar, frituras can refer to any of a variety of Puerto Rican fried foods. My favorite are the alcapurrias, made from a batter of green bananas and stuffed with different fillings. I begged Lori to tell me the story, and she happily obliged. Joaquin was an up-and-coming santero in the mid-70s in New York City. He was young and attractive and had flair and charisma, and his spiritual workings delivered results, all of which helped him develop a large following of paying clients. His plan was to open a botanica with his co-worker, and together they would live entirely off of their Santeria practice. They had saved almost $10,000 from payments for spiritual services, as well as their tips and salaries from the restaurant they worked at. That was a considerable sum in those days, and enough to rent a space and stock the shelves with the necessary products to get started. But just as they were starting to scout out a location, Joaquin took the money and disappeared. His co-worker and former friend later found out that he had gone to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic on a spending spree, partying it up for weeks on end until the money was gone. He returned to the city penniless. It was true that he was spiritually powerful and his work was effective, but he was also vain, selfish, lazy, and had become addicted to drugs. He also had inappropriate relationships with the people he was initiating into the regla de ocha, popularly called Santeria, something that is strictly forbidden by the moral code of the religion. His friend and prospective business partner had known this about him but chose to look the other way and hoped these faults would correct themselves. In addition to his selfish and careless ways, he abused the spiritual powers given to him. He was a child of Obatala, Santeria teaches that each person's head is owned by an Orisha or guardian spirit, oftentimes referred to as santos. And when a person undergoes the asiento or initiation, they are crowned as a child of that Orisha. When being initiated into the religion, they also receive colorful soup tureens called soperas in Spanish that contain the ashe or spiritual energy of the saints. Joaquin would often treat his saints like slaves and was particularly hard on Obatala. If the saint didn't deliver what Joaquin wanted quickly enough, he would place his sopera outside on the fire escape exposed to the freezing cold winter air. This is the ultimate act of disrespect, especially considering that certain paths of Obatala manifest in the form of an old man that is due the proper respect given to one's elders. Joaquin did not take the time to build a relationship of mutual respect and service with his ancestors, spirit guides, and saints, but rather treated them as servants that were there to cater to his every whim and thought they should be grateful for the opportunity to serve him, much the same way as he treated the people in his life. His former friend could not let his betrayal and deceit go unpunished. She was an accomplished espiritista and spiritual worker in her own right, and set about finding the perfect way to make Joaquin pay for his transgressions. She made offerings at her altar to her ancestors and guides, asking them to lead her in the right direction. That night, the spirit of a young woman who called herself Elodie appeared to the espiritista in a dream and said that she would take on the task at hand. Elodie claimed to have died in 1920 at the age of 19 from a sudden fever before she and her fiancé could be married. She directed the young woman to the location of her grave in nearby Woodlawn Cemetery before the dream evaporated. The young espiritista bolted upright in her bed with a plan solidly formed. It was an early September morning. The summer heat still hung heavy in the air, refusing to yield to the coming autumn. The young woman gathered bitter herbs from her supply closet, hierba bruja, escoba amarga, arrasa con todo, among others, and placed them in a white cloth, tying them neatly into a small compact bundle. She made her way to the cemetery and found Elodie's grave exactly where the ghost had indicated in the dream. She buried the herbs in the ground directly in front of the gravestone and lit 3 candles and prayed for Elodie and invoked her assistance. She poured rum into the ground directly on top of where she had buried the herbs. She traced a sacred symbol with powdered eggshells on the spot where the bundle was buried, then turned and exited the cemetery without looking back. The espiritista returned 3 days later and retrieved the bundle of herbs along with a pinch of dirt from Elodie's grave. At home, she ground the herbs into a fine powder and mixed them with the graveyard dirt and other nefarious ingredients. She placed the resulting powder in a small ceramic jar around which she lit 9 red and black candles and infused it with the power of the graveyard and death itself, promising to make abundant offerings to Elodie in exchange for granting her the power to bring her enemy to submission. Then she left to work her shift at the restaurant with the candles still burning, hoping that the apartment would not catch on fire. Later that day, she returned home and changed into a light summer dress, did her makeup and hair, put the powder in her purse, and went to the bar where she knew she could find Joaquin, since he had nothing better to do at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She found him in a corner booth, where he held court with whoever came to seek his services as a purveyor of certain substances for which he had recently become famous. She slid into the booth next to him, smiling. ¿Has venido a hacer las paces? Have you come to make peace? He asked. Ni hablar. He venido a maldecirte de aquí hasta el fin del mundo. Not even close. I've come to curse you from here until the end of the world. She leaned in to kiss him on the cheek, a gesture she knew would catch him off guard, and she took advantage of the few seconds of distraction to drop a pinch of the powder into the rum and coke Joaquin had in front of him. She whispered in his ear, I send to you death in the form of a woman. You will lose everything, and your saints will not protect you from the spirit that will drain you. They listen to me as well and are tired of your disrespect. Only you can stop this by falling at my feet and begging for mercy. If you don't, the cold grave and something worth beyond it awaits you. She stood up and walked away. She turned back and added, It's not about the money. It's about broken promises and not being treated like shit. She took a few more steps and added, But I still want the money back. Joaquin made a dismissive gesture and rolled his eyes. Before leaving the bar, she took one last glance in his direction and was pleased to see him take a sip of the drink. What happened in the following weeks is the stuff of legends that people still talk about today in certain circles. Joaquin confided in several associates that from that day forward, a thin woman with brown hair, wearing a plain white dress, was coming to him nightly. First he saw her in dreams, and then she would materialize in his room sitting on his bed, leaving him paralyzed until dawn, when he would awake with puncture wounds to his neck and wrists. During these nocturnal visitations, Joaquin's parrot, a beautiful red and green Amazon named Frida, would screech and frantically flap her wings, settling only when the evil spirit dissolved in the morning light. When he did manage to sleep, the face of the woman that had cursed him haunted his dreams, along with images of bats, wolves, and cemeteries. Just as had been spoken in the curse, everything went wrong in his life. All of his streams of income dried up, and poverty and illness washed over him. The life-sucking apparition weakened him to the point where he knew that he would soon be occupying his final resting place. All the cleansing baths, rompimientos, offerings to the Orishas, and curse revocations failed to remedy the situation. His ancestors and santos simply abandoned him to the justice of the woman he had betrayed. Joaquin knew he had only one option. Barely 3 weeks had passed since the woman had placed the curse on him, but he was a frail specter of his former self. One late September morning, he gathered what little strength he had and made his way to her apartment. By that point, the young espiritista had heard gossip from the local bochincheras about what had befallen him, and Elodie herself was letting her know through dreams and signs. She was not surprised to see Joaquin appear on her doorstep and fall to his knees defeated. "I've been waiting for you," she said, pulling him up and helping him into her apartment. She sat him down at the kitchen table and served him a cup of coffee heavily sweetened with condensed milk, the way she knew he liked it. "Perdóname. Confieso que te traicioné y vengo a pedirte perdón. Necesito que esta pesadilla pare ya. Si no, pronto voy para la tumba." "Forgive me. I admit I've wronged you and I've come to ask forgiveness. I need this nightmare to stop. If not, I'm headed for my grave." Joaquin spoke to her, full of contrition. He took a gold chain out of his pocket and placed it in front of her. "It's all I have. I will get you more until the debt is paid, but please make it stop." The woman took the chain and examined it briefly before putting it in her bathrobe pocket. "Consider your debt paid in full. It was never about the money. It was always a matter of respect and loyalty. Peace will return to you now, and if anything goes wrong in your life, it's not from any curse. Your life will be what you make of it, and I hope you make better choices." Joaquin left her apartment, and from that day forward, the life-draining ghost never returned. The young woman made a final offering to Elodie and ended their contract, sending her back to the world beyond the grave from which she had come. While she had forgiven Joaquin, it seems that the Santos never did. He never regained any of his former powers, and he was never really able to get back on his feet financially. Debts mounted that he couldn't pay, and eventually he skipped town, not being able to afford his rent. The espiritista knew his landlord, and when she heard that he had skipped town, she went to his apartment and took his parrot Frida home with her to raise as her own. She never saw or heard from Joaquin again. He simply faded to dust, which saddened her because all she ever wanted to do with her working was turn him into a better version of himself, albeit in a creative, witchy way. She hoped that wherever he was living a better and more honest life. I listened enthralled as Lori told me this story 25 years after it occurred. I asked her who this woman was that had used her powers to so creatively put Joaquin in his place and teach him a valuable lesson. She smiled and said, "That would be me," and we both erupted into hysterical laughter. Lorimar later moved to Florida, and we eventually lost touch, but I am grateful for all the valuable information and stories she shared with me. Afro-Caribbean spiritual circles are full of stories similar to this one, where people are held accountable for their betrayals and acts of disrespect towards the spirit world and members of their community. There is also a popular expression that states, "When you point one bad finger, you will have two pointed back at you." So keeping that in mind, let's be kind to each other and remember that it's always better to treat others with respect and compassion than to find yourself on the receiving end of a vampire curse, or any curse for that matter. If you happen to be viewing this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you would like to share your personal encounter with the undead, please contact me at thenightvisitorsvrs@gmail.com or share here in the comment section. Thank you for listening. You can find The Night Visitors on your favorite podcast platform as well as YouTube, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter where you will receive each week's episode directly in your inbox, as well as articles on vampire lore and vampires in popular culture. A special thanks to composer Tim Kulig for our intro music, Haunted House.